My name is Caleb Reed, and this is the story of how I discovered the true meaning of family, not through love and warmth, but through the cold, cutting edge of betrayal. It's about the years I spent as a ghost in my own home, a silent observer in the lives of those who were supposed to love me most. If you've ever felt invisible, like your very presence was an inconvenience, then you'll understand the heart of my tale. But even if you haven't, I ask you to listen, because it's a story about a boy who learned to find his own light when everyone else tried to keep him in the dark. That Thanksgiving Eve, the biting Colorado air cut through my worn-out peacoat as I stood before a grand door. My grandfather had called only minutes ago, and I could still feel the phone's heat through the fabric of my pocket. "Caleb, get over here right now. I'm at your parents' new place," he had said. His voice, usually a deep and thoughtful baritone, was bubbling with an uncharacteristic excitement, like a man about to unveil a masterpiece. "I have a surprise for you." My grandfather, Arthur, was a force of nature. A self-made man who had built a real estate empire from the ground up in San Francisco. He was perpetually busy, a whirlwind of phone calls, blueprints, and board meetings. Visits were a rarity, reserved for major holidays if I was lucky. The mere thought of seeing him, of feeling his solid, reassuring presence, was enough to bring a genuine smile to my face, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I pushed the heavy door open and was immediately swept into a different world. The warmth from a roaring fireplace washed over me, carrying the rich, savory scent of roasting turkey and sage stuffing. It was a picture of domestic perfection, a scene from a magazine. Grandpa Arthur sat at the head of an impossibly long dining table, his silver hair catching the light of the crystal chandelier above. His eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, lit up the moment they landed on me. He rose, his tall frame still imposing despite his 70 years, and pulled me into a firm hug. His familiar, comforting presence enveloped me, and for a moment, the weight of my exhausting double shift at the grocery store simply melted away. "Caleb, my boy," he said, holding me at arm's length, his hands on my shoulders. "What do you think? Do you like this house?" His voice was thick with pride, his gaze sweeping across the vaulted ceilings and gleaming hardwood floors as if he were bestowing a kingdom upon me. "Yes, it's an incredible house, Grandpa," I replied, my voice catching slightly. I took in the scene again. My father, Robert, looking unusually flushed in a crisp button-down shirt. My stepmother, Carol, beaming from the other end of the table, her perfectly coiffed hair not daring to move. And my half-brother, Kevin, slouched in his chair, already looking bored. "But it's my parents' house," I added, the words leaving my mouth before I could process them. A sudden, deafening silence fell over the room. The cheerful crackling of the fire seemed to die down, and the festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a tension so thick I could feel it pressing in on me. Grandpa Arthur's face, which seconds before had been alight with joy, hardened into a mask of confusion. His eyes, sharp and discerning, narrowed as they darted from me to my father, then to Carol. Robert, a man whose defining characteristic was his unshakable stoicism, went pale. The wine glass in his hand trembled, a tiny, telltale tremor that betrayed a deep well of panic. Carol coughed, a small, artificial sound, and plastered a strange, brittle smile on her face, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were wide with a terror I had never seen before. "Your parents' house?" Grandpa repeated, his voice dropping an octave. It was no longer warm and jovial, but cold and sharp, like the frosted wind whipping against the windows outside. "Caleb, explain what you mean." A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the November night, that I had stumbled into a hornet's nest. I looked to my father for an answer, for some kind of explanation, but he refused to meet my gaze, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth as if it held the secrets of the universe. It was Carol who broke the silence, her voice a high-pitched, trembling thing. "Arthur, there must be a misunderstanding. This is the family's house, for all of us." But Grandpa didn't look at her. His piercing gaze was locked on me, demanding the truth. And in that awful, suspended moment, I knew that a secret, one that had likely defined my entire life, was about to be violently ripped into the open. I was born in a quiet suburb of Denver, the kind of place with wide, tree-lined streets where the leaves turned to brilliant gold in the autumn, and you couldn't go to the supermarket without running into someone you knew. My family, however, never quite fit that idyllic picture. My mother, Eleanor, passed away from complications during my birth. I never knew her, but I grew up with the heavy, unspoken sense that my arrival had been traded for her departure. I have only a single faded photograph of her, a smiling young woman with eyes just like mine. She was the one light in my life I was never allowed to meet. My father, Robert Reed, was a man carved from granite. Stern, emotionally distant, and perpetually disappointed, he treated me with a kind of weary obligation. My very existence seemed to be a constant, painful reminder of the wife he had lost. When I was 3, he remarried. Carol was a woman with a smile as thin as a razor's edge and eyes that missed nothing. A year later, they had a son, Kevin, and from that moment on, the dynamic of our household was set in stone. Kevin was the sun around which their world revolved. To my father, he was the heir, the future of the Reed name, a chance for a do-over. To Carol, Kevin was her entire universe, a prince to be protected, coddled, and endlessly spoiled. And I was the stepchild, the outsider, the faint, gray shadow that drifted through the hallways of the house I was supposed to call home. The disparity in their treatment of us was a fundamental law of our household, as consistent as gravity. I learned it early. When I was 6, I remember watching with wide eyes as Kevin unwrapped a gleaming, brand-new 21-speed mountain bike for his birthday. Later that day, my father presented me with a rusty, second-hand bicycle from a garage sale, its chain loose and its tires balding. "It's good enough for you," he'd said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Kevin needs the best to build his confidence," Carol would add with a saccharine smile, as if my own confidence was an irrelevant commodity. School was no different. My straight-A report cards were met with a cursory nod from my father and a simple, "Don't get complacent." But when Kevin managed to bring home a C- in social studies, avoiding an outright failure, the house would erupt in celebration. Carol would praise his unique way of thinking, while my father would clap him on the back, beaming with a pride I had never once been shown. I wasn't a jealous child, not really. What I craved wasn't the new bike or the praise. It was something far more fundamental. I just wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, to feel, even for a fleeting moment, that I was a valued member of my own family. But as the years wore on, I came to understand that in their eyes, I would never measure up. Carol's words became a constant refrain, little cuts that deepened over time. "Caleb, why can't you be more outgoing like Kevin? Or, you should be grateful we give you a roof over your head." Our family wasn't poor. My father was a regional manager for a paper supply company, earning a comfortable salary that afforded us a pleasant life in our 4-bedroom house. But that roof never felt like mine. My room was a small, converted storage space in the basement, always slightly damp, with a single, high window that looked out onto the underside of the porch. It was cold in the winter and stuffy in the summer. Kevin, meanwhile, had the largest bedroom upstairs, a veritable shrine to his fleeting hobbies, filled with video game consoles, sports equipment, and posters of rock bands. Once, I mustered the courage to ask my father why I couldn't have a proper room like my brother. His response was swift and brutal. "Don't be greedy, Caleb. You need to learn your place." Words like those became the bricks of the wall they built around me. I learned to navigate my life within their confines, to expect nothing and therefore never be disappointed. I learned to perfect a placid smile, to pretend that everything was fine. Inside, a quiet storm of loneliness and confusion raged, but on the outside, I was calm. I threw myself into my studies and told myself that one day, I would build a life so far from their shadows that they would never be able to touch me again. When I turned 18, I graduated from high school with honors. There was no party, no congratulatory dinner. My diploma was placed on the mantelpiece, where it was quickly obscured by a framed photo of Kevin winning a hot dog eating contest at the town fair. My dream was to go to college, to study architecture, to build beautiful things. A life a world away from the emotional ruin I had grown up in. I wanted to make my grandpa Arthur proud, the only person who ever seemed to truly see me. That dream, like so many others, was swiftly and unceremoniously crushed. One humid evening in July, I sat down with my father and Carol in the living room, my hands clammy as I held a stack of college brochures and financial aid forms. I carefully laid out my plan, explaining how I could apply for scholarships and loans, how I was willing to work part-time to cover my expenses. My father listened with a stony expression. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his coffee and looked at me with eyes that were utterly devoid of warmth. "Caleb, we can't afford it," he said, his voice flat. "But I can get loans, I can work." I started, my voice desperate. "The family's resources are limited," Carol said smoothly, resting a manicured hand on my father's arm. "We have to prioritize. Kevin has such great potential. He's a people person. He'll need a strong start at a good business school, and we need to invest in him." I stared at them, speechless. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Kevin, my half-brother, who had barely scraped through high school and spent most of his waking hours playing video games and joyriding with his friends, was the one with great potential. I, with my 4.0 GPA and acceptance letters, was a luxury they couldn't afford. I was stone. No outrage, no sorrow. Years of emotional battering had worn me down into this smooth, silent shape. I simply stood up, a profound and hollow coldness spreading through my chest, nodded once, and walked down to my basement room. That night, lying on my lumpy mattress and staring at the water-stained ceiling, I made a silent vow. If they wouldn't believe in me, I would believe in myself. If they wouldn't invest in me, I would become my own investment. 2 weeks later, I packed my few belongings into 2 cardboard boxes and a duffel bag. I had saved up a few $100s from a summer job mowing lawns. I left a short note on the kitchen counter and walked out the front door without looking back. I started working the night shift at a local Safeway, stocking shelves from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. The work was grueling and mindless, my body aching from lifting heavy boxes and my mind numb from the monotony. But I didn't complain. Every dollar I earned, every hour I worked, was a small victory, another stone in the foundation of my new life. I rented a tiny, dismal apartment on the edge of town. The walls were stained, the faucet in the kitchen sink dripped relentlessly, and the heater clanked and groaned like a dying beast. But it was mine. It was my sanctuary. For the first time in my life, I could close a door and know that the space on the other side belonged entirely to me. No one could tell me to know my place, because I was finally making a place of my own. For the next 4 years, that was my life. I worked. I saved. I existed in a state of self-imposed exile from the family that had never wanted me. The only connection I maintained was with Grandpa Arthur. He'd call every few months, his voice a welcome warmth in my Spartan life. He'd ask how I was, and I'd tell him I was fine, that I was working hard. I never told him the truth about college or why I had left home. I was too proud, too ashamed to admit how thoroughly my own family had discarded me. He'd sometimes mention sending checks for my birthday or Christmas, and I'd lie and say thank you, assuming they were being sent to my father's house and simply absorbed into the family coffers. To me, it didn't matter. His phone calls were gift enough. Never imagined the past I'd buried would collide with the present that night. Grandpa Arthur's voice finally sliced through the tension, as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. "Robert," he said. His gaze locked on me even as his words cut toward my father. "When I wired you $550,000 6 months ago, what were my exact instructions?" My father flinched as if he'd been struck. He finally looked up, his face a ghastly shade of white. "Arthur, we thought." "Don't tell me what you thought," Grandpa snapped, taking a step toward the table. "Tell me what I said." My instructions were explicit. The money was to purchase a home for Caleb. The deed, Robert, was to be in Caleb Reed's name. I bought this house for my grandson. The confession hung in the air, A shocking, undeniable truth. My mind reeled trying to process the scale of it. $550,000. A house. For me. The years of neglect, of being made to feel worthless and small, suddenly coalesced into this one monstrous act of deceit. This wasn't just about being unloved. This was a deliberate, calculated theft of a future I was never even told I had. Carol, ever the survivor, tried to salvage the situation. "We were just looking after it for him," she insisted, her voice trembling. "He's so young. We thought it would be better if we managed the property until he was more settled. It was an investment for his future." An investment? Arthur's laugh was sharp and humorless, echoing through the dining room. "You're living in his investment. You furnished it with his money. You're preparing to eat a Thanksgiving feast in his dining room. You didn't just sideline my grandson, you robbed him. You stole from your own son." He turned his furious gaze back to my father. "And you let this happen. You let her convince you to steal from Eleanor's boy. Your own flesh and blood." The mention of my mother's name was what finally broke my father. A choked sob escaped his lips, and he sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The image of the stern, unmovable patriarch was shattered, replaced by that of a weak, defeated man. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching a play. The shock was too great, the betrayal too deep to be processed as simple anger. It was a wound that went clear to the soul. All those years I had spent blaming myself, wondering what was so fundamentally wrong with me that my own father couldn't love me, believing I was a burden. It was all a lie constructed to facilitate their greed. Grandpa Arthur walked over to me and put a steadying hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Caleb," he said, his voice now quiet and filled with a profound sadness. "I am so sorry. I should have been paying closer attention. I was too busy, too far away. I trusted him. That was my mistake." In the hours that followed, the rest of the ugly truth came tumbling out. The birthday checks I never received. The college fund Grandpa had started for me when I was born, which my father had drained to pay for Kevin's car and lavish vacations. Every lifeline my grandfather had thrown me over the years had been intercepted by the very people who should have been delivering it. Grandpa was merciless. He gave them 2 weeks to vacate the premises. He called his lawyer right then and there, his voice calm and decisive as he set in motion the legal process to have the deed transferred correctly into my name. A month later, I stood in the same foyer, but this time it was different. The house was empty, stripped of Robert and Carol's furniture. The silence was no longer tense and suffocating, but peaceful and full of promise. Grandpa Arthur stood beside me, handing me a set of keys. "This is yours, Caleb," he said. "It's what your mother would have wanted. It's what I've always wanted for you." He told me about my mother, about her kindness and her fierce love for me even before I was born. He told me that he saw her strength in me, her resilience. For the first time, I felt a connection to the woman in the faded photograph, a sense of legacy that had been denied to me my whole life. Standing there in the echoing emptiness of my new home, I didn't feel revenge, only peace, deep and quiet, like the first calm after a long storm. The silence wasn't the heavy, oppressive kind I had grown up with. It was a gentle, welcoming silence, full of possibility. I ran my hand along a sun-warmed wall, the texture grounding me in the present. This was mine. The thought was so vast it was almost overwhelming. The scars were still there, deep and intricate, a map of the boy I used to be. They were a testament to every dismissive word, every overlooked achievement, every night spent feeling invisible in my own home. But they no longer ached with fresh hurt. Instead, they felt like old wounds that had finally, truly begun to heal, leaving behind tougher skin. They didn't dictate who I was. They simply reminded me of how strong I had to become. The shadows of my father's disappointment and Carol's coldness were finally beginning to recede, chased away by the bright, clean light of this new beginning. For the first time, I felt I could breathe without the weight of their expectations on my chest. I wasn't the unwanted stepchild or the family burden anymore. I was just Caleb, and that was enough. Sometimes family isn't the people who raise you. It's the ones who refuse to let you stay broken, who hold a light so you can find your way back to yourself.